WSDC tournament. We would like to introduce side proposition Team Malaysia and side opposition Team Indonesia. I'm Jordan, and I'll be your chairperson for this round today, as well as Stephanie, who will be your timekeeper for today. The motion of this round reads, this House believes that mainstream search engines should refuse to list results with racist, sexist, or otherwise offensive content. May we now move on and invite proposition to introduce themselves and double up as a tech check on their side. Thank you.
Hi, the first speaker for proposition will be Jerome. Second speaker is Jonathan. Third speaker is We Earn. And reply is Jonathan.
May we ask side opposition to do the same as well?
Hi, the first speaker is Joshua. The second speaker is Keisha. And the third speaker is Judah. And the reply speaker will be Joshua.
If the judges are ready, may we invite the first speaker from side proposition to begin today's debate.
Can everyone hear me? You know what? I don't need my space. Panel, information is not a plain Jane item. It is a commodity. It is the literal source of discrimination and the way that individuals act in the world. It shapes your worldview and it begins to create the actions which all flow from it. So it looks like things like how articles that you read about Islam being potentially the so-called worst religion in the world leads to a shooting of you perpetrating attacks on Muslims. It leads to vicious hate crimes against Chinese individuals when you constantly read about the Chinese virus and the blight of China upon individuals. We say it's not the fault of minorities that they were born under a certain skin color that didn't identify as a hegemon. This debate is not about choice versus censorship. It is about racism versus filtering. Three-pronged setup from side government. First of all, what are these search engines and how we characterize them? We think they are the primary sources of information in the 21st century. So these are high capital groups like Google, like Bing, like Yahoo. We say that under our model, these groups will be the ones that do most of the removing all of the listings of these racist and sexist articles on the web. So what do we mean, and what is the categorical difference between what we will keep and what we will censor and remove? So we are going to remove all bigoted and discriminatory content on the web. Three questions that we will answer while removing this content. First thing is about the language of the content. So the language of the content cannot be overly emotional and portray things of sensationalization and little constructive value on the issues at hand. So this looks like things like when you talk about immigration, calling Mexicans the nasty savages that cross the border, instead of discussing properly the merits in an unemotional and logical way. Second prong, it is the ideas that perpetrate and aggregate negative stereotypes upon individuals. So it looks like calling individuals the Chinese virus or aggregating ideas that Islamic individuals are blights of society, or maybe that the Nazis were actually good for the world. Thirdly, the purpose of these media will be specifically to create no constructive value beyond spreading negative stereotypes and hate within the world. So all of these things like potentially sites that are known to be able to perpetrate hateful content, we say those are things that we would not allow to be listed. Third prong of our mechanism, accountability and how we will ensure it. So not all countries have hate speech laws, but we think that under the ones that do, this is a preemptive mechanism that prevents a reactionary measure, and it is a mechanism that is an extension of hate speech laws. We will have independent third-party bodies that are technocratic, bipartisan, and they will scan through the content to see what can and cannot be listed. We say similarities in the real world point to the fact that the government was able to set up the Senate in order to check Facebook and body. We will also point to the fact that we have auditors to keep in check corporations and other such. We don't need to prove that racism ceases to exist, But on a scale, we think that proposition needs proof that the prevalence of negative stereotypes does go down under our world. 2 arguments to put forth to you today.
Point.
Not yet. So first of all, being how the principal duty for behemoths of search engines to regulate their quality of content. So first 3 layers of analysis. First layer, the role of search engines and why are they obligated to ensure the content on their platforms. So first layer, information dictates action, ladies and gentlemen. The information that you take in dictates your worldview, and then so on dictates the actions that you impose upon the world. So what is the value of positive info, and why is it important that it is not specifically discriminatory? We say, since information is a prerequisite to our choices, what you read and what you listen to, the podcasts and videos that you see online, ultimately fold your perception of all groups within society, particularly minority groups. So wicked information courts wicked actions in of itself. So reading about the Chinese virus informs your worldview and your actions until you internalize the fact that you translate those opinions into potential microaggressions against these people. So things like be able to label individuals as druggies from Mexico, or be able to see call certain individuals and perpetrate Islamophobia online, means that you get certain incidents that result in tangible harms. So in New Zealand, where there was a mosque shooting that killed over 100 individuals, we say that's a tangible harm that results in manifestos being published about how we should all hate Muslims and hate Islam. Second layer, why search engines have an obligation to filter info. The importance of search engines to note here is that the primary source of info forms solely from the search engines. So your ability to access any site on the internet forms from the ability for the search engine to list it on the web. We will make it removable. We will not allow individuals to access these certain sites. So if 7 billion individuals on this world use it to access every other site, we see that search engines have a culpability when they don't filter. They are culpable to legitimizing the views and the harms that these groups face. There is a direct intent involved in this listing, especially when you consider the fact that the reasons they are not going to remove these listings under Opworld is mostly because of the profiteering aspect of it. So being able to get clicks on Google constantly allows these search engines to gain a lot of profit. Even if they don't result in direct intention, at the very least, we think they're negligible. Second argument about how exactly we have before that, third level of analysis to the first argument. How exactly that the anonymity of the web voids individuals of their legal culpability, whereas in the real world, they would be held accountable. So the individuals that post horribly hateful items on the web are going to be held accountable if they were found out in the real world. The key nuance here is when they post things on the web, they are not held accountable, not because of the fact that the law doesn't persecute them, but because the law cannot enforce persecution on people across the web. We say this is a preemptive measure to ensure that those things don't happen in the first place. They abandon that legal culpability on their side. Second argument about how the practical descendants of this harm and of their policy will ultimately create. So we have to understand that there are 2 people we're talking about. The first stakeholder being individuals who are on the fence, who constantly go around and look on daily things on the internet, maybe what Taylor Swift is watching and such. And 2, individuals who are already racist to a certain extent. We say 3 layers of analysis. 1, why does this play such a powerful role in manipulating your preconceptions on the world? Before that, I'll take a POI if there's any withstanding. All right, given
Point.
First thing, okay.
Yeah, so just a clarification on your mechanism, which you didn't actually take. Would you take down a transcribed slave owner's diary?
Assuming the slave owner's diary is something that perpetuates hateful stereotypes, I think that we would take it down. And if it perpetuates the idea of aggregating racist ideals against Black people, we will take that down. First layer, why is this such a powerful role in manipulating the preconceptions of the world? We must understand that there is a delegitimization of racist views that occurs when search engines don't allow this to occur. So the algorithm being something that once you click into it, it shows you another thing that's also racist and things and such, means that eventually you start to internalize the fact that this is something that you should believe in. But the second thing is there is a confirmation bias that happens in there. So racist information feeds into your bias that you might already have about this info. The third thing is you create echo chambers. So not only would it be the fact that I respond to a racist article, but the comment section under that article creates a platform for me to be able to create crucibles of hate and acknowledge that my view is legitimized in the worst sense. There's also a subconscious bias, right? So you play off the vulnerabilities of individuals. So when individuals are already fearing that their job will be lost due to immigrants, you play on their vulnerability in order to get likes. Second thing about the harms of these discriminatory actions, you can get microaggressions, hard harms, and segregated communities. In terms of microaggressions, I think it looks like job discrimination, education discrimination, movement restriction because of the severe fear that you have within your livelihood. You are locked out of systems of education and jobs because of the fact of the internal fear that you perpetuate due to the articles that perpetuate people's worldview to hate you. There's also hard harms to this, right? So individuals like having shootings, Pizzagate, racist, being able to be spit on the face in the streets, all of these things are hard harms to perpetuate. And the final thing is they have segregated communities. They are entrenched racist stereotypes. Ladies and gentlemen, ultimately what you have to note is that Indonesia will be supporting racist and sexist articles on the web. That is all you need to know. Never proud to propose.
Thank you very much to the first speaker of the proposition. Before we go on, the timekeeper, could we make sure that your rings or claps are audible? Because I could not hear them.
Okay, sure.
I'm sorry, I just could not hear the rings or the claps now.
Can you hear me
you are. Yes, you are audible. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. If the chairperson can continue.
Sorry about the bell just now. Would it be okay if I use my bell instead?
Yeah, sure.
Also, because I'll be using my speaker for the for the speaking purposes, could the next speaker also inform me if like there are any forms of like feedback that would, like, for example, disrupt your speech and like it basically won't make the audio clear to the other team as well as the judges? Could the following speakers just notify me if that's okay? I take it as a yes. Okay. So according to my timer,
yeah, the speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 45 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. May we now invite the second speaker, the first speaker from side opposition to deliver their speech.
Hi, am I audible? Information does dictate action. But the greatest problem I had with Prop was that they made a ton of assertions about how wicked discourse led to wicked actions without much explanation as to why it actually did so. That was the problem with their case. I don't think they can win on that alone. A two-point model before I begin my arguments. Firstly, we will allow these like racist and offensive results to appear if you search it up, but crucially, you will be monitored if you search things up which could potentially lead to violence. For instance, we allow you to search up how to make a bomb, but if you do other things like also search those materials up on Amazon and go there, then the FBI will obviously keep an eye out on you. Generally speaking, we will allow these results to appear, but if it does show or it looks as if you're going to use this information to like be violent, then generally all of these intelligence agencies will put you on their watch list. Importantly, this deals with a lot of their harms on how wicked information actually leads to wicked discourse. Secondly, these are the minority of articles. For every one racist article that exists, there are usually 5 racist articles. Generally, we would say that society is becoming more progressive and these articles get like much more coverage. I'm going to present 2 arguments in the speech. Firstly, on the principle, on the purpose of the mainstream search engines, and secondly, what offensive content online will actually do. Before that, a few points of rebuttal. Firstly, on the massive contradiction coming from the proposition. Now, they want to use the information to still be covered in CNN in a neutral way without any form of sensationalization, right, or emotional language. What does that necessarily mean? It means that if you were covering the coronavirus and you say that Trump is calling this the Chinese virus, people who are prone to hating China, that's within their subconscious. For instance, if they had a family member who lost a job because it moved to China, or they already have preconceptions that they do not like China, they will still call COVID-19 the Chinese virus if that appears online, even if it was covered in a neutral way. They cannot claim any benefits with this tension within their case. But secondly, you can be held accountable online, right? This is like totally or ludicrous coming from their side to say that you can't be held online. Firstly, hate crime laws do look at what you say online. Generally, that can be used against you. But secondly, and more importantly, you can be fired for your company. You can be ostracized by your community if you make extremely derogatory and racist remarks. Generally, in the comment sections, people can also check you. So we would say that there is an incentive for individuals to not be racist and like offensive online, and they can be fired by their company. But even in the worst case, I'll talk about why this is still a unique benefit that you get on our second house. Lastly, on their idea on how you get like a confirmation bias and racist people think that their views are justified. This was highly uncomparative, right? Because racist people have a racist view which is inherent to themselves. For instance, you naturally believe that the white race is superior to the African American race. That does not mean that you need an article to supplant or to confirm that, right? Because this is something which you believe is inherent within the human race. But furthermore, things like patriarchal beliefs, right? Sexist things. Some men like who are patriarchal, they generally believe that men are superior to women. So we would say that this was an uncomparative argument that people don't just have like a confirmation bias when you read one racist article. Firstly, on the principle, on the purpose of mainstream search engines, why it's designed to raise awareness and why that's a good thing. Before I continue, I'll take your point.
You argue that people are increasingly progressive and won't have racist views, and yet cement the harm that some individuals cannot be changed. Even if this is true, this debates about the scale of racism, why you're okay with people propagating those views and instigating racist actions.
Right, that's a very unnuanced view because in society, there are obviously racist people and there are obviously progressive people. We're talking about the racist people here who are not going to change on their side of the house the moment you take this down. But I'll talk about why progressive people are actually better on our side and why generally the stakeholder analysis falls to our side. Firstly, let's talk about the principle. Because when you look at platforms like Google, Yahoo, and Safari, when did they exist to begin with? They existed to be an accessible platform of information and knowledge so that everyone in society can benefit from them. Panel, mainstream engines are a tool to facilitate the freedom of speech that we say is inherent to the human condition. But why do we think this is particularly important in the case of racist, sexist, and offensive content? Because firstly, this is unrepresentative of the current situation, and that would constitute the largest whitewashing scheme in history. Because I want to contextualize that racism, sexism, and the discriminatory beliefs which exist online exist in the real world as well. If you look at the United States, policemen are right now using highly concentrated tear gas that can cause irreversible damage to your lungs and eyes. They're firing point-blank rubber bullets that can seriously maim and injure protesters. That's the subconscious racism within America which exists to a serious degree. Or if you look at Germany and the way 100,000 Syrian refugees who are accepted by Angela Merkel are currently been discriminated against because of the rise of right-wing populism on a constant basis, all of these racist and discriminatory beliefs still exist in the world today. And we think that people deserve to know about this as well online, because online search engines are designed to provide information that should represent society. They should not be involved in the mass whitewashing of all the harms that prevail today. What is the importance of this principal layer? Irrespective of any benefits or harms that might accrue because of this information, people in society deserve to know that there are still highly racist and offensive people in society. That should be available online as well. You cannot disillusion society that progress exists when you censor all this information. We think that's a principal harm that they cannot stand for. But secondly, we think that offensive racist content is the only way to highlight these things that happen in society. That is to say, you can't have like neutral things like encyclopedias and CNN websites like they want to talk about. Or like the reason for this is that encyclopedias, like what they want to talk about, still remain neutral. So you cannot dynamically adapt to the harms which happen. For instance, if you include a statistic on that 100,000 of African Americans were victims of stop and frisk, but you don't explain what that number means, why it was so devastating for African Americans, when you don't include that emotional language that they want to censor, why is it unlikely for you to discuss this number? Because it means that you are taking a political stance. That is the reason why information in a neutral state still represents a form of whitewashing. And only can people in society know about these serious harms of racism when you read an article that says frisk them and like N words. That's when you realize that stop and frisk policies are racist. Panel, we cannot allow whitewashing to continue when everyone in society thinks that society is great and you don't see the racist material online. But secondly, what will this offensive content actually lead to, contrary to what they want to talk about? We think there are three important stakeholders in this argument. Firstly, on progressive and good people. Secondly, on the middle ground gray area individuals. And thirdly, on radical extremist groups that they want to engage with. Firstly, on progressive good people in society. What this offensive material provides for them is a platform to show the world that the cause they fight for is justified. The reason why there is little support for progressive movements in the status quo is because people fear that the progressive movements are simply there to take over. The question in this debate then is how do we reassure that fear and ensure that they are portrayed as the victims? We tell you can only get that when you highlight the constant oppression that minorities face online. When progressive movements are able to use this material to highlight that, hey, look at this incredibly racist person. We aren't looking to take over. We simply don't want to be the victims of this kind of rhetoric. That's when you can quell the fears of many individuals in society. We think that's exclusive to our side. Because when the information you portray online is simply neutral, that's when progressive movements die out because they have nothing to fight for. There's no clear, tangible harm that they are fighting against that people can identify with. The thing about mainstream search engines is that racist news articles get spread online, and progressive people can really show the intensity of the fight they're fighting against. But secondly, in terms of middle ground people, they're able to realize that this material is incredibly horrendous. Generally speaking, if you don't have much of a stance on these discriminatory values, but you see someone calling African Americans monkeys or really disgusting slurs, that's really jarring and will probably sway you to be against racism. I would like to note that most people in society are well-meaning, and they do want to do some level of good if they can. If you want to give your seat up for the elderly. Like, once they see this piece of writing which is truly offensive, that's when they're more likely to stand against that. It becomes harder to justify or identify with a racist group when they are clearly painted as extremists and offensive. Comparatively, if the material online on their side is all neutral and chummy and good, that's when the middle ground feels like they do not have to care about minorities. Look at Google. It says that all minorities are doing well. No one is racist anymore. Look at CNN. They're all supporting minorities. Why do the middle ground have to do so? That's when you lose support from the middle ground. But thirdly, on racist groups, we tell you that that's far worse. The moment they cannot vent their anger out online, that's when they're more likely to do things like go to secret meetings or do things individually and harm minorities. We think that that's when it's far harder to track these individuals when they do things in their private own time instead of when it's online. The construction of progress begins with the destruction of suppression. Proud to oppose.
Sorry, may I confirm if everyone could hear my bell just now? Yes, sir.
Yes, we could hear it, and I would ask the speakers to respect the rules of the competition. After 8:15, we will no longer be taking notes and no longer take into account what you say. Okay, just to make sure.
Okay, thank you. We thank the speaker for his speech. He spoke for 8 minutes and 25 seconds. If the judges are all ready, may we invite the second speaker from side proposition to further his case? Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Great. Panel, let's just take a step back for a second, because team opposition and most of the harms they wanted to analyze stemmed from a misrepresentation of our case and blatant ignorance in what the nuances were actually provided. Because they said, guys, it was a contradiction for us when we wouldn't allow CNN to be able to discuss things like racism and tear gassing of the police whatsoever. Here is the crucial difference. We told you from first proposition that we can discuss racism. That did not mean that we could be racist. That was the difference, because we told you that we would be exclusively taking down articles and media that was specifically designed and tailored to exacerbate racist tendencies. News sources that wanted to capitalize upon the sensationalization and irrationality of individuals in order to exacerbate racist tendencies. That was the situation, which is why when they said, look, you will never have discourse under your side of the house at the point at which you want to take down this information, is crucially unimportant and not unique in any way, because we still have discourse over racism. We still have discussions over stop and frisk. We can still have political discussions and political leanings within our opinion pieces or writings. It just could not be in a way in which exacerbated racist tendencies that would enable individuals to then carry out their actions in a way that hurt minorities. Right? So let's just talk about a few things. On their model, they said that they wanted to have these news sources up, but at the same time say that they wanted to have it monitored. A few things to say about it. Firstly, this did not take into consideration the fact that in the status quo, it is already extremely hard to take into consideration and prosecute these individuals. That's to say that anonymity on the web is prevalent, and I do not know what exclusive mechanism they have to curb the problems in the status quo. But secondly, notice that this is ultimately a reactive measure, which means that they still have to accrue all the harms upon minorities before they are able to monitor and then take down these individuals. They do nothing about the legitimization of racist tendencies that we told you about. But lastly, if they were really so concerned about these individuals, I think this is a direct contradiction to them still wanting to support things like hate speech laws whatsoever. right? What is the next thing they talked about? They said that they have a principle, that this is about accessible knowledge and the internet was designed to provide an accurate portrayal of what society is. I think there is a distinction to draw because maybe the internet was designed to provide information, but the point at which your information directly leads to the mass suffering of minorities in the status quo, the reason why we saw a 40% hike in hate crimes after Trump's election, these are the harms and these are the principles and rights need to outweigh. What it means is, on a balance, their principle about accessibility to knowledge is one that comes at the cost of the right to life to individuals who are constantly being spat on the streets in their world. The last thing to talk about is that, say, progressives currently do not have power because they appear like they want to take over the world. I think firstly, this is just untrue, right? Because I do not see why that is the case at the point at which this was an assertion to begin with. But notice that if this was true, the harms exist on the both sides because partisanship is just something that exists. But also, we think that this was fundamentally abhorrent because they would instrumentalize individuals on the ground and portray their mass suffering and allow for these individuals to continue to talk badly about them in order to further the goals of their movement. Is that really moral? Is it really true that we should be able to portray the suffering of individuals and allow individuals to continue to, exacerbate racist tendencies in order to somehow further the goals of the progressive movement? I think that's principally abhorrent. But notice what was unengaged with from Jerome's speech. Firstly, he gave you two important pieces of characterization. Firstly, that information informs views, shapes worldviews, and translates into actions. And notice why this was particularly the case. Because another piece of characterization was that mainstream search engines serve as the exclusive source of information to 7 billion individuals on Earth. That the virality of the internet and the way by which technology extremely important in the 21st century, and the reason why the internet is a culturally normative factor that shapes how we think, was one that directly influenced what we deem as acceptable and what we deem as moral in society. He then went on to tell you, and notice, very little engagement with this, that mainstream engines are culpable because they legitimize racist and sexist content, right? When they continuously allow this information to propagate over the web. They often monetize the information, which means that they are able to profit off this, which means that it's particularly pernicious because they profit off the suffering of these minorities. But we told you, we went further and said, that mainstream engines, at the very least, were complicit. We recognize in society that individuals should not espouse racism. At a point at which corporations has far more power to influence how individuals think, I think that's where they exacerbate the harms of these racist and sexist tendencies. But we also told you that why this information was particularly harmful is because you have things like algorithms which continually feed into the confirmation bias that individuals have. That the more I look at racist articles, the more that pops up at a point at which I click on the tabloid and see those as my advertisements. It feeds into subconscious biases that the opposition did not want to talk about. Things like emboldenment at a point at which you have a community of individuals to band around you and gain legitimacy in order to be racist. It translates into actions as told by the example after Trump's vote and after the Brexit vote. But we think we went further. The existence of the information in and of itself, even if it did not translate into racist actions, was harmful because of its widespread use, and minorities still have to fear because they know the information is out there, and that was pernicious. Before I continue, yes.
Isn't it far more fearful if these individuals and racist people directly go to the minority communities themselves instead of venting their anger out online?
So I think on both sides of the house, this harm will be symmetrical. Because notice, no one is trying to change the tendencies of racist individuals, because on both sides of the house, they will be racist. It's then about the individuals on the middle fence and what, as a culturally normative medium, this internet and these search engines are able to influence their actions. I think racist individuals, as characterized on your side of the house, if they're really so racist, they will probably also do the same things. But on to my argumentation about how we are able to change permission mechanisms and improve the discourse that we have in society. Because notice the incentive structures of individuals who are currently extremely racist or sexist in their portrayals of minorities. They would probably, individuals like Ben Shapiro, individuals like Milo Yiannopoulos, or individuals and organizations like Breitbart, they still have an incentive to want to remain relevant. That is that they still can have influence over the political arena. They still have to monetize their platform and get a profit. What this means is that uniquely, under our model, that will force them to moderate their views and use things like statistics. Instead of saying that, Ben Shapiro going on Twitter and saying Palestinians should die in a ditch. That's the comparative, because at the point at which we force them to moderate what they say, it also means that our discourse is far more productive. That because I have to remain relevant in the 21st century and not be cancelled on the web, I now have to reform the ways by which I convey my information and convey my political views. The reason why this is important is because things like polarization, which happens far worse under their side, is now mitigated because individuals have to resort to things like rationality and being able to have proper discourse on the web. This means that we lead to a natural moderation and normative moderation of views on the web, which we think is particularly important. What we need to consider at the end of the day is that fundamentally, we recognize things like hate speech in the status quo. Our model is just an extension of the principles underpinning this, because we see that minorities in the status quo continually have to accrue the harms that happen on the side of opposition's world, side with proposition.
I thank the speaker for his speech. He spoke for 8 minutes and 22 seconds. If all the judges are ready, may we invite the second speaker from side opposition to deliver their speech.
Proposition loses this debate immediately when they only wanted to play in their safe characterization of offensive and hateful content. They were only willing to defend, not wanting to have like a few white supremacists call it African Americans in America. But they were neglecting the cries of millions of African American women who are intersectionally oppressed and wanting to vent out their anger online. They were ignoring the victimization of thousands of immigrants who want to lash out their anger at the ICE establishment in America. Proposition reduces the legitimate viewpoints of all these people, and I think that this is evidence of their liberal ignorance to say that these kinds of views and a lot of the information within search engines should be just utterly removed from society. I'm so proud to oppose. 3 questions to answer in this debate. First of all, why do individuals deserve infinite access to information? Second, which side of the house betters awareness within society? Lastly, I'm going to talk about which side of the house betters progress for social movements. Before that, I'd like to just clarify this kind of like weird rebuttal coming from their second speaker on how we made a contradiction. No, because the thing is, if you want us to defend all forms of like racist, sexist, and offensive content, then their side of the house also needed to defend an extreme ban on all sorts of content that might seem like offensive, right? Which includes also minorities speaking out about their about their grievances, or like slaves in the past showing a lot of their diaries that explain the full horrors of their slavery. I think that they need to defend this, or not. I don't think a lot of their arguments can stand. First question, which side of the do individuals deserve infinite access to information? The first thing I'd like to respond to is this idea that information dictates action, and what you read folds your perception of groups in society, and you create a lot of like microaggression within society. First of all, no, right? Information might be one source of shaping how you think, but what's even clearer is the stuff you see on your daily lives, right? The moment news sources are saying that Wuhan was the epicenter of the virus, racist people will still go out on the streets still thinking that it came from China and spreading all these kinds of things. I don't think that that's an exclusive benefit that they can take under their side of the house. But literally, their arguments and examples that came out of their second speaker backfired their own case. When they talked about how Trump won, that literally concedes that Trump's win in 2016 concedes that racist people exist because of experiences, not because of the spread of information. The fact that they see in daily life that immigrants take up their jobs, for instance, that is the kind of information that still exists under their side of the house. But second of all, even if, let's say, we're to buy the argument that information dictates action, I don't see why their side of the house will protect minorities either. Because if they wanted to protect and change middle ground people, like what their second speaker said, or like people in the gray area, they're more likely to get misinformed by on proposition side of the house, because the moment they lose their job to like an immigrant in real life, for instance, or like middle ground people who might experience poor people robbing them, for instance, they're likely to create even worse negative perceptions on their side of the house. And that's the moment they're likely to create much more microaggression. Why do we better help gray area people? Because gray area people are better able to see the counter information online. We told you that since first on how the horrendous words and content online makes it far easier for people like African Americans to respond by retweeting anti-Trump messages and have swing voters see those atrocities. Those are all arguments literally coming from our first speaker. We heard no response to this. I think that their second speaker responses was pretty redundant. But third of all, they clearly like neglected our point on how on the accessibility to information and why that's an unrepresentative of the current situation in society, and that constitutes the largest whitewashing scheme in history. You disillusion minorities by saying that everything is great and everything is like good, and by saying that okay. So what they responded, the only response we heard from them was that we can still talk about police brutality and immigration on CNN. First of all, even if we were to buy that, this isn't good because you're diluting the real message behind it. By saying that, we should reduce immigration quotas on CNN means that you're actively fooling minorities you want to protect. Because on the streets, racists are still spitting out, "Get out of my country," and that's a far harsher form that you get under their side of the house. I'll return his argument that we said that even if Trump and like rednecks are tweeting racist content, that's pretty good for discourse, right? Because that's the moment you get counterbalances within society. I think that we get better information there. When we weigh this first clash, proposition loses the principle completely because they only want to defend the status quo, which happens on both sides. Because even if you remove offensive content from search engines, proposition never proved why they changed the minds of people, which means that the harm still exists just outside the boundaries of search engines. The fact that they're not willing to ban the experiences that slaves felt in the 1930s, the question in this debate is not the eradication of content, but how to best equip minorities and the rest of society with the tools necessary to fight against their oppressors. We think that this happens more under our side of the house the moment you show society the full, complete extent of oppression. Second question then, which side of the house betters awareness within society? The whole thing that they said here was pretty much a one-liner argument on how you get much more echo chambers and segregated communities within society. This completely does not happen for several reasons. First of all, we told you that there are progressive people in society, right? Which means that you're more likely going to get much more support for these kinds of people. But second of all, I think that middle ground people are better able to remove these kinds of echo chambers because they're able to realize that this material is incredibly horrendous, right? When you look at when middle ground people don't have a much stance on racism, but you see someone calling out African American monkeys or other disgusting slurs, the most likely you're going to be incentivized to actually be against racism. But third of all, even if we have to say that there might be echo chambers, we concede that completely on search engines. Why is that still a better comparative? Because under their side of the house, since first, they were unwilling to defend the comparative of echo chambers being far worse under their side of the house. The moment you don't allow them to vent on search engines and they go towards the streets, they go towards protesting, they go towards people's homes trying to vent out their anger and frustration that you don't allow them to do on search engines. That's the moment echo chambers and segregated communities become far worse under their side of the house. Before I move on to my third clash, I'll take a POI.
It serves no benefit for minorities to also be hateful towards the majority. If majority racists are going to be displeased by real-life actions, why do you still want them to perpetrate further racism to people who may not be racist yet online?
Okay, I'll answer that question on my third clash on why we actually, even if we get super racist comments, that's still better. First of all, I think why do we get better social movements, right? Because first of all, even if we have to defend the worst kinds of offensive content in the status quo, this is okay because their side of the house sets a normalization with society, not to accept issues that are unpalatable to the public. This is the moment society is more likely to not want to talk about issues of police brutality or extermination camps of the Uyghurs in China, because these are all censored under their side of the house. The moment you make society negligent to a lot of issues, that's the moment you get a lot of drawback of support for activism groups. groups. But second of all, you don't get political change to protect minorities under their side of the house. Because, and Proposition conceded this, that people who are inherently racist means that you give them far more power into places of governments that harm society. The moment you give blacks a veil of protection on search engines and they perfectly think that society's fine, that's the moment you don't get political campaigns that cater towards the oppression that blacks face. But third of all, grassroots movements are much better under our side of the house. Even we had to defend the worst comments. That's the moment we have better accountability and progress, because that's the moment minorities get angry, and that's the moment you get the rise of social movements. That's the moment you get a rise of like the abolition movement to stop slavery. That's the moment the construction of progress begins with the destruction of suppression. Proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for her speech. She spoke for 8 minutes and 19 seconds. If all the judges are ready, may we invite the third speaker from side Proposition to deliver his speech.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Is it okay if I use the toilet for a quick second? All right, is it good? Go. Thank you. Thanks.
We're so sorry.
Just to clarify, what is happening?
Oh, my teammate went to the toilet for a second, get an emergency. Be quiet, really fast.
Hi, am I audible? Right. Thank you. Push the laptop. 3, 2, 1. Because African Americans can see racism online, they don't realize there's a problem. I'm sorry, but this is a spit in the face to every single minority within the status quo who suffered severe structural harms against their very livelihoods, from the New Zealand shooting that took out 18 Muslim individuals in a single day to the massive police brutality that took out African Americans all across America. I think this debate boils down to one simple issue on who better reduces all racist tendencies, and the very reason opposition loses debate is because they were never willing to engage in a fair context. I'll break this debate down in 3 key questions. Firstly, I'll provide clarity on what the burdens of this debate are. Second, I'll talk about the principal clash, and finally, who better protects minorities on both sides of the house. Firstly, on clarity and the burden, we didn't need to prove that discrimination is completely eradicated on our side of the house. So long as we prove that on a scale, less offensive views are propagated, less offensive actions are instigated, we already win. Opposition has to defend the status quo, a world where minorities are unable to walk on the street without fear of being hit or spat on. They need to tell us why racist, sexist, bigoted, and offensive views are intrinsically important and are unalienable towards their side of a better world. Here's the first point I want to talk about when they feel their burden. They said we weren't fair in choosing the context in which we were talking about, and hence they give us an argumentation on minorities calling out racism and using it as an empowering fight against the oppressors. Firstly, on the specific context of minorities speaking out against racism, this isn't racist or offensive. If you're the active active victim of racism, you challenging that structure doesn't make your view inherently racist or offensive at all. The vast majority of society would agree with this. But second, even if you consider that to an extent maybe you can go overboard and over penalize your oppressors, we would be happy to defend a world where this kind of information that instigates that level of violence is one that we take away as well. Because we uniquely prove that this taking away of abhorrent information that hurts individuals' actions and forms horrible worldviews allows individuals to actively moderate their thoughts and create more positive discussions and positive discourse to solve the issue at hand. On this strategy, opposition lost this debate on two grounds. Firstly, there are cases about how people are good actors, that moderates are extremely intelligent and rational individuals, and the use of racist information is a galvanizing force for people. Firstly, this isn't true. Yes, progressives and racist individuals are likely fixated on both sides of the house, but it doesn't mean A, racist individuals can be further emboldened and internalize their hatred, which could lead to direct actions that hurt minorities, from microaggressions to shootings in the status quo. But second, moderates can be swung to be more racist when discrimination and offensive views are actively emboldened within the narrative of the status quo, when you're actively reading more of these kinds of articles online. Brazil went from a progressive leader to Bolsonaro. Americans went from Obama to Trump. France almost will be going from Macron to Le Pen. All these structural problems are ones in which they need to deal with on their side of the house. But second, even if this were true, right, why do you support monitoring? Why do you support hate speech laws on your side of the house? If you want to defend all information regardless of connotations because you think people are good actors, why do you care about monitoring to ensure they don't carry those views into action? You concede those harms and you concede it's likely to exist. You take action because you want to protect minorities. We say the world in which you better protect minorities is on our side of the house. Moreover, you concede that these views could have a potential risk of leading on to those harms. So in which case, your mechanisms of change are one that's reactive at best, but most importantly, they're also non-exclusive. We have the same kind of laws that ban hate speech. The unique difference is it's harder to regulate on the online sphere when anonymity and your VPN browsers can literally protect your identity. We think that's where we get a scale of benefit of protection of minorities on our side. On the first dash, on the principle, they say we facilitate the freedom of speech because information is intrinsically important. The reason why this context of the principle is wrong in and of itself is because society already infringes upon some level of freedom of speech when they consider hate speech laws exist. We think it's an extension of hate speech laws when online information actively leads to these kind of harms in which they never dealt with. But second, the information they characterize conveniently in this context don't apply, because things like fighting against racism is not a context in which we are going to ban. Why? Because uniquely, what is different about the information we ban and what we don't ban was three key levels. Firstly, the language in which you use, whether it's constructive or actively discriminating upon individuals. So this looks like talking about police brutality in a constructive manner instead of legitimizing the racist tendencies of the police that actively hurts African Americans on the ground, which they need to defend in their subreddit posts and in their online commentary. That's a unique distinction in this debate. Before I move on, defend yourself.
Your side of the house only wants to remove search engines. Please engage in the vast majority of other outlets and alternatives that racist people can use to harm minorities.
Firstly, those alternatives are the same on both sides of the house. The unique difference is removing one removes the scale of harm which they can cause. But second, we told you moderates can be swung to more racist tendencies, and that's a unique harm you need to deal with. But finally, I'll deal with your harm of how racist individuals being unable to vent out anger online will actively take it to the streets. I'll have that. I'll specifically flag it out for you. On to the clash of information. They say the information they wanted to talk about was information that's constructive in nature and leads to positive discourse. The reason why this is going to appear is because their information is highly skewed with emotional bias and is heavily sensationalized to the point in which positive discourse is structurally crippled. What they get is a polarization of discourse and a world in which more individuals move on to the further right end of the spectrum. This looks like racist individuals legitimizing other racist views and being unwilling to engage on a separation on the middle ground. Uniquely, this happens because of the confirmation you bias you get unique to the algorithm, unique towards the comments you have, unique towards continuously reading racist articles and racist content online. But most importantly, on the last crash as to how, you could compare it then is that ours are better defense presents information as a whole, because even on our side of the house, we will agree some right-wing narratives do exist, narratives that want to limit immigration, for example. These narratives are better moderated because individuals like Ben Shapiro would still want to have a voice within society. They still want to maintain a platform. When we uniquely take out information when they're unable to be racist and use slurs, what they will be forced to defend is a will of constructive discourse where they move away from slurs and use structural analysis to prove why maybe it's a legitimate reason to limit immigration and to be fair towards American individuals. We think that's when you actually have a moderate form of discourse that can lead to better outcomes on our side uniquely. Finally, on who better protects minorities, let's take out this one exclusive harm they want to talk about. Racist individuals not being able to vent out anger and instead hurt minorities on the street. Firstly, we told that the anger of racist individuals oftentimes compounds when they're legitimized within their echo chambers, but most importantly, when you increase the number of racist individuals that have the very same views, that anger, it flares up within that very circle. This means maybe it's true that on our side of the house, some conservative bubbles will have very racist individuals, but those specific individuals will also be similar to your side. What is uniquely different here is that when they're able to share their racist views online, post racist articles and post sexist articles, and they gain massive clicks, they gain massive amounts of views, they further legitimize their belief, and they further believe that it's a legitimate action which they can take and translate into hurtful actions against minorities on the ground. Uniquely, we also tell you that if it's true that your side of the house has some level of laws, we have it as well, so we get to mitigate this harm if you believe it exists. The unique difference here is that the number of individuals that can potentially propagate these kinds of harms is uniquely less on a comparative on our side of the house. Finally, on minorities fighting for change, we think you're still able to fight for change in and of itself, but what's uniquely different here is that you don't have to fight against the harmful sensationalization and an inability to actually engage in positive discourse. Because on our side, when you have positive information and constructive discourse, not flat with horrible languages that forces people to move on the worst ends of the spectrum, we get an actual discussion on police reform that's intrinsic towards taking down their innate subconscious biases. They don't get on the outside of the house because we defend information that's positive for people, because we defend the rights of minorities to live a life absent of fear and persecution. We propose.
I thank the speaker for his speech. He spoke for 8 minutes and 27 seconds. If the judges are all ready, may we invite the third speaker from side opposition to to deliver his speech.
Hi, am I audible? Okay. Okay, I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. The reason why we can call out racists and get social movements is because we are able to directly clash with their purely inflammatory search results. So the only goal in this debate, to end racism, can only happen when people can galvanize this information and use it as ammunition. Prop wanted a conclusion that they cannot link to a premise. That's why they lose this debate. I want to note, all the harms Prop talked about were features of racist people, not a feature of racist articles or search engine results. As long as they had no clear link as to why all forms of racism is because of search engines, this harm existed on their side as well, actually on a much more massive scale. I have two things to talk about in this debate. Firstly, does this fulfill the purpose of a search engine? And secondly, will this solve sexism, racism, or offensiveness in all forms? Before that though, 2 points of framing as to why they already lose this debate. Number one, our monitoring was not contradictory in any way. We said the criminal justice system and police systems exist already on our side of the house. If there's reasonable belief that someone might be violent, we have incentives to put them in our watch list. Even if we lost on the aspect of anonymity, that's fine because that wasn't the crux of this debate at all. The crux was how we solve racism on a large scale. But secondly, and this is really crucial, they made a round-losing contradiction. First said you get more racist when you see more articles. Then second said, on both sides, people are equally racist in response to RPOI. This was damning to their case. If you believe characterization 2, you destroy all the harms of being more racist on their side. If you believe characterization 1, you agree to the more harmful alternatives that racists go towards, like actually attacking people, like actually being more violent. OP has been very clear though. People can get more racist, but silencing them brings no solvency. First question then, does this fulfill the purpose of search engines? No, it does not. A search is supposed to advance knowledge. The only considerable parameter is when search results limit the advancement of knowledge. Thus far, Prop has not been able to answer why these search results are a limitation to knowledge advancement. What did they say in response here? Firstly, they said this was a preemptive mechanism and an extension of hate speech laws, and it's a third-party body. It's absolutely not an extension of hate speech, these kinds of laws, right? It's an extension of free speech destruction. This preemptive mechanism is massively harmful. When you say the Netherlands was just an Indonesian trading partner, for example, when you say there wasn't any genocide in Indonesia or any other country or past colonies, you destroy articles of past harms and destruction. This is so important. Governments blindside people and make them believe that progress has already been achieved. By their own third-party mechanism, they're the ones who perpetuated even more hatred. But secondly, even if it is a third-party body, you cut out critical information. This is a massive harm when you cut out history, when you cut out current discourse. When you try to shield people, it leads to destroying the only thing a search engine is actually used for. The next thing they said here was that they have an obligation to filter information because then they would be culpable to legitimizing views. Firstly, this was a fully unimpactful argument. The principal harm of being culpable was to allow information to exist. Culpability also only works when the impact is direct. Their filtering didn't have a clear harm getting destroyed. Their filtering didn't lead to people not being racist. It's just people being racist in other means, right? They were clean in the sense that they took down racism in their search engines, but they were unclean in the sense that people can be racist in other features. But secondly, even if search engines are culpable, they are more culpable when they take down this information. You are fully denying the ability to understand why racism exists or to literally respond to them. This is massively harmful because under their side of the house, there was no call-out mechanism. Notice our extension though, that racism isn't a one-way street. A white man can be racist to black people, but a black person can also be racist to say, kill all white cops, for example. The scope by which something is racist or offensive can happen for anyone. This was an extension that they fully neglected. This is important though, because the examples of Prop were entirely cherry-picked when you actually look at their mechanism that could literally destroy other minorities as well. Let's do some weighing then. Our extension was crucial here, as I've already explained, but secondly, we best approximated what a search engine should be, which is to pour out information and relevant information as well. This is important because we don't blindside people. We didn't contribute to massive erasure of information. This was a massive and destructive form of whitewashing on their side of the house. It destroyed the understanding of oppression, but it also destroyed the ability to fight back against racists. That's why we were far ahead on the principle level. I'll take your point now.
Do not misrep us. We said we weren't banning news and specific articles because the connotation of those forms of news and history wasn't racist in nature.
Right.
Why can't you talk about police brutality without saying that they're legitimate in being racist against African Americans?
Yeah, okay, sure. So I'll actually talk about this in my second extension, all your examples about Ben Shapiro and all those kinds of other people, right? Secondly then, will this policy solve sexism, racism, or offensiveness? We said the existence of physical oppression exists on both sides of the house. The question is, how do you diagnose this oppression on mainstream search engines like Google and YouTube? To respond to their POI, they said right-wing narratives are better moderated on their side. 3 responses. Number 1, this was an absurd argument to make. I think moderation exists organically. The kind of analytical articles come after people feel a harm to themselves. This means that when you get the society's understanding of what happens in their lifetime, you can have more analytical articles coming up through time as well. This is much more better under our side of the house because we can lead people to understanding the correct viewpoint. But secondly, I think many people believe Ben Shapiro is analytical and correct as well, right? If analytical articles to say why immigrants shouldn't come in can exist on proposition, I'm not sure what they're screening here. Ben Shapiro's articles would still exist on your side because the perception is that those things are analytical. But thirdly, even if they are moderated on proposition, the vast majority of racist people are more likely to go underground, more likely to go to private rooms, and they do much more violent and harmful things in the physical realm. The harm weighs much worse on proposition in that sense then. What did they say also? The line of logic, the full line of logic on proposition is to say, seeing the Chinese virus tweets, for example, makes you racist, and information dictates action, and it makes people alt-right, for example. 2 responses. Firstly, this is untrue. People are racist already because of what they see, because of experiential knowledge. So when experientially you conclude that Chinese people are disgusting, you will probably react more harmfully with no platform on proposition. This creates a much more massive destruction. But secondly, even if the individuals were not racist initially, I don't think the incentive change is to get racist when you see these kinds of tweets, right? When you see people make jokes about George Floyd, when you see people joke about the Chinese virus, you are more likely to feel disgusted by those comments at the racist than siding with them, right? This is crucial characterization. The harms are unlikely to materialize on their side of the house. So Prop agreed with us too when they said racists spiked after Trump. That's true. That means your stance is constructed by experiences rather than just seeing a search result. I don't see how their harm actually materializes in this debate. But the last hanging fruit was to say our mechanism was just a reactive measure. Guys, that's the only thing you can do to get benefits, was to be reactive. Notice this line only works if their side was absolutely capable of making a racist person not do the harms of psychologically or physically harming someone. As long as we proved that we had less likelihood of having racist people rise up on their platform, for example, we took that benefit. Proposition was absolutist in the sense. Silencing people on search engines don't totally silence their racism. Let's do some weighing here then. Firstly, you should weigh our argument much more heavily because all the progress we were able to get was because of exposure and subsequent counter articles. This was a benefit in comparison to the marginal harm of props only getting slightly more racist as an individual. This was the extent of props' impacts. Our impact was literally getting all the progress. But secondly, I'm willing to concede we might suffer a harm of experiencing offense and people being swayed by racist rhetoric because we were able to achieve solvency with that characterization. When you have counter articles, point 2 of my first mechanism, explaining that immigration is economically beneficial or that police defunding is a good thing, for example, in response to blue or all lives matter rhetoric, that's when you get more progress. That's when social movements are actually empowered. In this debate, we want to change the minds of people. We want to change the minds of racist individuals. We said progress exists through realization. Proposition will only get regress through more and more suppression. Proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for his speech. He spoke for 7 minutes and 54 seconds. If the judges are ready, may we invite the reply speaker from side opposition to close their case.
Am I audible? Panel, 3 notes on proposition strategy that loosened the debate from the very get-go. Firstly, props' burden wasn't simply that offensive views decreased. I mean, that's kind of given, like if you remove the content online. Their burden was to prove why this was a good thing, and that's something which they totally failed at. But secondly, prop is just making bad assertions, especially third prop, right? If you support free speech, then you can monitor them, right? Panel, that's not an infringement of the freedom of speech. We simply don't want you to kill people. That is what monitoring means. And we never said that we support hate speech laws. We said that we support hate crime laws. The fact that they totally strawmanned our arguments and gave us fake arguments means that we don't actually have any contradictions at all. There was a big difference. We don't censor speech, we punish crime. But thirdly, we pointed out the contradiction within their case. And here's where I think they really misunderstood our point. If you cover racist material in a neutral way, like what they want to talk about, then people with racist tendencies still have a confirmation bias. They still feel like doing bad things. Look, imagine if I hate China and I read CNN's totally neutral article on covering Trump calling COVID-19 the Chinese virus. Sure, CNN might be neutral, but the fact that I still have a racist tendency, the fact that I see Trump calling China out, means that I still get the confirmation bias because Trump is the one calling them out. Panel, their contradiction on still covering things in a neutral way means that all of these racist groups will still be racist on their side. I think they really lose a lot of solvency on their model alone. I have 2 clashes within the speech. Firstly, on middle ground people and why they're better on op. Secondly, on ultra-radical groups and why they're also better on our side of the house. I'm going to prove that the harm is not symmetric, like what Prop 2 and 3 wanted to assert the entire debate. And importantly, their only rebuttal to our principle was that information can be limited based on harms. If we can take the practical clash, we automatically win the principle as well. So firstly, let's talk about middle ground people and why this accurate analysis falls to our side. First, if they are indeed in the middle ground, then I really don't understand why they would go around killing people. I think Prop had the burden to explain why this was the case. But second of all, we explained that middle ground people are generally good people and they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to go to jail. After all, they are in the middle ground, right? They don't have inherent beliefs. And it's not enough to say that they're anonymous online, right? Because the government has data to your Twitter account, your email, your location. So I think that was just factually untrue. I'd like to point that out. This just shows us that middle ground people won't have all the harms that proposition wanted to talk about. Their characterization just totally negates all of their benefits. But even if I were to buy this characterization, my question would be why a middle ground person would now want to kill African Americans because he sees something online. We gave you structural reasons as to why moderate people don't want to be racist. That was the fundamental leap in logic that lost proposition this debate. That was too loosely asserted by their side. Finally, third prop said, well, racist people and middle ground people can become racist eventually. I think their burden was to prove why this would happen when they read things online. That was the leap in logic, which they totally failed. But why was this exclusively better on our side of the house? We told you on how middle ground people are now seeing a really jarring piece of work. If you are indeed in the middle and you see that this racist material calls African Americans monkeys, as a middle ground individual, you're more likely to be against racism when you see this highly offensive piece of work because you're generally a well-meaning person. Comparatively, when you Google up racism and CNN is fighting for minorities in a neutral way, everything is perfect, and the material shows online that it is portrayed in a neutral manner. We told you on how neutral was still a form of whitewashing. That's when middle ground people become negligent and they don't want to help minorities. Let's just do a bit of weighing in this debate. As a middle ground person, are you more likely to support minorities when you see someone being incredibly discriminatory and look at them being harmed, or will you support them when everything is perfect? I'd argue that the likelihood is far better on our side of the house. Panel, even in their best case where middle ground individuals are concerned, they lost on that clash alone. But second, let's talk about racist and radical groups. And like through Prop 2 and 3, they kept saying this harm was symmetrical. This wasn't, right? This was totally inserted without any form of explanation because they totally failed to respond that they're bad on both sides, but the degree of harm different. We told you on how they're more likely to go on like attacks personally, individually, in these shadows and in these secrets if they cannot do this online because they now feel silenced. That's the moment you cannot monitor them, unlike on our side when they are online and you can like put them on your watch list. Panel, the construction of progress begins with the destruction of suppression. Proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for his speech. He spoke for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. If all the judges are ready, may we invite the reply speaker from side proposition to close their case.
Hi, am I audible? Great. Panel, I'm going to make it very clear and tell you why exactly opposition lost out on the burdens that they had to prove in 3 ways: the principle, minorities, and discourse. But before that, I would just like to point out 2 things. Firstly, opposition did not at any one time tell us why sensationalization was intrinsic to the internet and so important in understanding racism. Because I'm sorry, team opposition, but you don't need to say that something is the Kung Flu to understand that Chinese people are being discriminated against. You don't need to say that Palestinians are scums of society to understand that the IDF is currently shooting Palestinians. That was why they lost out. That when they said, we need to understand these in order to get social movements, all these were not true and the premise already fell. But then the second thing they said, and notice conflicting characterizations they had at a point at which they wanted to say progressive individuals are so rational, but at the same time, because if you really think that society is so progressive and so ready to accept that racism wasn't a problem, I do not understand why you wouldn't take that step and therefore take away these racist articles from the internet. But the last thing I just want to mention is that a lot of their harms flowed from a misunderstanding of our model. That's to say that we can still have news. We can still have history. We told you it's only at a point at which it is inflammatory in nature and it designed in a way to exacerbate racist tendencies in a way that individuals like Ben Shapiro or individuals like Milo Yiannopoulos does to revel on specific traits of Chinese individuals, which we thought was harmful. The 3 things then. Firstly, on the principle. We told you why the duty for search engines to refuse sexist and racist information was intrinsically important. Because of the influence they have, and because the exclusive source of information was one that was culture normative in nature in the 21st century, which leads to A, emboldenment, and B, legitimization, which means that they are culpable to a large extent and at the very least complicit. What was your response to this? Guys, we think the internet was made for accessible knowledge and therefore we should have it to advance knowledge. I'm sorry, but rights conflict in society, and we recognize and proven to you why exactly minorities in the status quo are far more important to accessibility to some more information. They said you deny the ability to understand racism. Is that true? I can still say that Black Lives Matter, which is not an inflammatory comment, and still be able to call out police excesses and brutality. That was why we can still accrue all the benefits of social movements. They said, look guys, racists are always racist. We firstly told you these are about individuals on the fence who could be influenced. But secondly, on a scale, I think Trump's emboldenment of racist tendencies is far greater than just one article on line, right? Secondly, on minorities, they wanted to talk about, wow, minorities cannot vent out anger. I think let's just look at what minorities are doing in the status quo. I think the vast majority of minorities aren't being overly punitive or overly offensive, right? We say Black Lives Matter. That is not an offensive comment. We say we need equality for all. That's not inflammatory at all. This means that we are specifically talking about communities of individuals who feel privileged, who feel like they're in power, and therefore leverage off their white privilege to then have inflammatory comments. That's why those were the main stakeholders that we changed under our side of the house. Lastly, they said, oh, you cannot fight for change and protest. We already told you that is not true. The civil rights era did not need to rely on inflammatory comments in order to get change. It was the fact that Black individuals were dying on the streets. We need to get change. That doesn't change at the outside of the house. Lastly, on discourse, we told you why currently there is an incentive structure to continue moderating yourself at a point at which you still want to have influence and still want to monetize your platform. They say, oh no, guys, it will exist organically. Individuals will moderate over time. Is this true? Because notice that Ben Shapiro and individuals profit off the polarization and sensationalization of their news, which means that it is not true that this will exist organically and they exacerbate the harms. We get a natural moderation because we force individuals to be more tolerant and moderate. For all those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for his speech. He spoke for 4 minutes and 16 seconds. If the judges are all ready with their scores, may we invite them to go to a separate breakout room and deliberate the scores. Thank you.
Thank you, Team Malaysia.
Thank you, Team Indonesia.
Thank you so much, Team Malaysia. Good luck.
Good luck.
Thank you very much, both teams, for a great round. I will now be asked to be moved, for the judges to be moved to a deliberation room.